as some of the key reasons why we might still find feces in the environment. And so specifically from our work, from what we were finding, so there might be other work out there, but the two key themes that came out for us involved child feces disposal and also the issue of pit emptying. And neither of these issues are new, but I think what we found from our studies is a renewed sense of urgency to take these on, and also understanding that latrine use in construction has been a predominant focus of ODF, but important to emphasize and realize that you can't actually be ODF if children and their children are defecating in the open and their feces remain in the open and pits are being emptied, and that matter is going out. So first, child feces management. So according to the National Family Health Survey, which was done a few years ago now, 36.1% of mothers in India indicated that they had disposed of children's stools safely. And in the rural area, this number was actually quite a bit lower, 25.5%. So two of the interventions, which you heard about this morning, one in Karnataka and one in Odisha, talked about how there were efforts to make sure that children's feces were discussed in part of the interventions. So in those two places, you actually see very different numbers from the NFHS. So in Odisha, that baseline number was 12.5%, which according to the NFHS was the lowest rate in India. And in Karnataka, it was 42.1%. And I'm not going to put the data back up there from the Odisha study this morning, but what we found at baseline was that those numbers were actually 3 and 6% in intervention and control communities among the communities we visited. So really, those numbers were quite low. And just to have an illustrative example, I'm just going to share findings from Odisha, where again, so you can actually see the gray parts of the chart indicate the baseline, and we have 3% in the control and 6% at the intervention. And then from the intervention, you do see, at end line, we do see in the blue these increased rates of safe disposal, and attributable to the intervention was a 20% increase. And what's important here is that the intervention we deployed was a part of a package of interventions with latrine use. It was one aspect. And so in relation to the whole thing, it was actually quite low touch and quite low cost. And yet, we were still able to see impact. Now, the other part to think about on this is great, but wow, we have quite a ways to go. 28% is an improvement, but that's not, that leaves a huge percentage of the population still to be engaged in safer child feces disposal, not to mention really what the norm is among the control, which is about 92%. So what are the key lessons from this? And I'm collating now the key lessons from both the Odisha site and the Karnataka sites here. So first, low-cost interventions to increase safe management of feces are needed and impactful. And when I say safe management, I'm kind of saying beyond just disposal, but thinking about also the sort of life cycle of picking things up, needing to wash your hands, having to clean out maybe nappies or potties or whatever it might be that is used to manage. We found in Odisha that potties were given, but in fact our evaluation revealed that these were not nearly as important as practical guidance for how to do this, and also making people aware of risk perceptions, given that many people thought child feces were not harmful. In some ways that's quite good. Potties are expensive. The other thing is that in both of these places, we had lessons learned from our intervention. So first, again, information on health risks of unsafe disposal on both locations was critical. Guidance was really important, but guidance specifically at various child stages. We think of children 0 to 5 in this sort of safe child feces disposal zone. The 5 cutoff might be a little too young. there are kids older than that who are still defecating in the open, but also from 0 to 5, there's incredible variability, from kids who are needing diapers to kids who are walking around, to others who could actually be trained to use the latrine. So we're talking about an evolution of behavior during these stages, and also different things that people need to do at different stages. So making sure targeted messages so that they are engaging and actionable. And this means also that we're reaching the people that we want to reach. I talked earlier that we had a lot of people from the households, 96% of eligible households were in attendance at our meetings, but often the moms weren't because they weren't allowed to leave the house, so they had different responsibilities. So what do we need to do to change our modalities to make sure we're reaching the people that we need to reach? We need to think about going to them and doing these things at the times that are convenient to women. And we're not creating a burden for caregivers, but thinking about devising and working with them to create interventions and strategies that are adaptable to their lives and not creating extra work. And the final thing, both sites identified that there was incredible interest among Anganwadi workers, and so there's an opportunity here to move out of the household and into broader spaces. So next I'm going to talk about latrine pit emptying. This slide is just a graphic of what Ruhi already mentioned, which is incredibly important. This graph shows the types of latrines across all 4 sites. The red shows highlights the number of single pit latrines. Bihar should have an asterisk there. That team intentionally sought out 2 pit latrines, so this data is not representative right now, but the other sites are. So just highlighting that single pit latrines, despite the intention to have 2 pit latrines, single pit are the norm, and as Ruhi said, this has implications for the need to potentially, depending on where you are, empty more often, and to do so when the feces are still live or wet and potentially quite dangerous. And then moving on to some of the findings that we found from the OPM team in Bihar, they investigated to understand the extent to which there was a perception about pit emptying and whether or not it was convenient. And they said, they found that 60% still found that the idea of emptying the pit was inconvenient, while a lot of others would outsource to do so if they were going to do it at all. So not only do we have a situation where pits might fill quickly, the filling might be dangerous, it's also seen as inconvenient. So we're not really setting ourselves up to make this job easy. And also on top of that, there's an issue about safety and marginalization for pit emptying. So again, from the Bihar study, we have some qualitative research. First of all, households were not clear on safe disposal, often cleaning the pit when the waste was still wet. Desludgers talked about merely transporting the non-decomposed waste from one location to the other, and therefore, importantly, undercutting the potential benefits of using a latrine at all. So this is why this is incredibly important. Is there a point in practicing latrine use if we're really just putting the feces back into the environmental spaces? And on top of that, there are implications for who is hired and who is engaged for doing the work of pit emptying. If this is something that's perceived as being inconvenient and not something that people can do themselves, it may be perpetuating historic roles and status and engaging certain cast members to do the work. So the final take-home message is latrine use is important, but not the only behavior necessary for keeping feces out of the environment. Safe management of child feces, including disposal, and also putting washing water in latrines, caring for nappies, washing hands, needs to be addressed, and there are promising interventions and strategies that should be adapted and scaled across the country. And unsafe pit emptying practices could undercut the benefits of increased latrine use. And so we really need to identify and employ strategies to address pit emptying before negative behaviors and impacts might be adopted and take hold. So thank you.